I stood at the edge of my property that Tuesday morning, staring at fresh tire tracks gouged through my timber stand, and felt my blood pressure spike to levels that would have made my cardiologist weep. Someone had cut a road straight through 40 acres of mature oak and hickory trees that I had been managing for the better part of 15 years. My name is Connor Caldwell, and I had purchased this land just outside Branson, Missouri back in 2011. The property was my retirement project, a place where I could escape the city and manage a small timber operation while living in peace. The main house sat on 5 acres at the front of the property, technically within the boundaries of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, though the bulk of my timber acreage extended well beyond their jurisdiction. Or so I had thought. The road was maybe 12 feet wide, carved with heavy equipment that had torn up saplings and damaged the root systems of at least 24 valuable hardwoods. I followed the path, my boots crunching over fresh wood chips and displaced soil. The route cut diagonally across my property, creating what appeared to be a convenient shortcut from the main HOA development to a new construction site I could see in the distance. I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything: photos, videos, GPS coordinates. As a former civil engineer, I knew the importance of evidence. This was not just trespassing. This was destruction of property, and depending on the value of the damaged timber, potentially a felony. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown local number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Caldwell? This is Brenda Morrison, president of the Whispering Pines HOA. I wanted to reach out before any misunderstandings occurred." "Misunderstandings?" I could hear the edge in my own voice. "There is a road cut through my timber without my permission. That seems pretty clear to me." "Well, that is what I am calling about." Her voice had that particular tone that I had learned to despise over the past few years, the sound of someone who believed they were being perfectly reasonable while saying something completely insane. The HOA board voted to extend access to the new community park we are developing. Your property was the most direct route, and we felt that as a member of the community, you would understand the greater good this serves. "My timber acreage is not part of the HOA," I said flatly. "Only my residential lot is. You had no authority to do this." Actually, if you check your covenant documents from 2019, you will see that all property owners within a half-mile radius of the main development agreed to certain easements for community improvement projects. This road falls under that provision. I had never signed anything like that. I received no such documents, and I certainly did not agree to any easements. The vote passed with a majority, Mr. Caldwell. Your individual approval was not required. Now, I am calling as a courtesy to let you know that the construction crew will be back tomorrow to complete the grading work. Please ensure that you do not interfere with their operations." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, trying to process the sheer audacity of what had just occurred. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to my attorney, Marcus Webb, who had handled the original property purchase. The second was to the Taney County Sheriff's Office to report criminal trespassing and property destruction. Deputy Richardson arrived within the hour, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy, but took thorough notes as I walked him through the damage. He photographed everything, measured the road width, and examined the property markers I had installed years ago that clearly delineated my boundaries. "This is pretty cut and dried, Mr. Caldwell," he said, flipping his notepad closed. "They had no right to do this without your permission, covenant or no covenant. I will file the report, and you should hear from our office within a few days about next steps. What about stopping them from coming back tomorrow? You can post no trespassing signs, and if they show up, call us immediately. If they proceed despite being warned off, that is criminal trespassing, and we can make arrests." I spent the rest of the afternoon installing a dozen bright orange no trespassing signs along the road and at both entrance points to my property. Then I called Marcus back. "I pulled the HOA documents," he said without preamble. "There was an amendment proposed in 2019, but according to my records, you specifically opted out of any provisions that would affect your timber acreage. You signed a legal document preserving your property rights beyond the residential curtilage." So Brenda was lying. Either lying or incompetent. Possibly both. I am drafting a cease and desist letter right now, and we can follow up with a lawsuit for damages if needed. I will need you to get an assessment of the timber value they destroyed." I knew exactly who to call for that. My buddy Richard Chen was a certified forester who had helped me develop my timber management plan years ago. He agreed to come out first thing in the morning to assess the damage. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Brenda Morrison's casual dismissal of my property rights, the arrogance in her voice when she told me not to interfere. The HOA had been a thorn in my side for years, sending petty violation notices about my grass height or the color of my mailbox. But this was different. This was a direct attack on my livelihood and my land. Richard arrived at 7 the next morning with his measuring equipment and a grim expression. We walked the length of the road together as he examined each damaged tree, taking core samples and making notes on his tablet. "Connor, this is bad," he said after 2 hours of assessment. "You've got significant damage to about 30 mature trees. Some of these oaks are 80 years old, the ones they actually cut down, plus the root damage to the others. I'm estimating somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 in lost timber value. That is not even counting the environmental impact or the cost to restore the land." I felt sick. $60,000. That was money I had been counting on for my actual retirement, for the careful selective harvesting I had planned over the next decade. "Put it all in a formal report," I said. "I need documentation for the lawsuit." As if on cue, I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. A large bulldozer was rolling down the unauthorized road from the HOA side, followed by a dump truck loaded with gravel. I sprinted toward them, waving my arms. The bulldozer stopped, and a man in a hard hat climbed down from the cab. "You need to leave," I said. "This is private property, and you are trespassing." "I have got a work order from the Whispering Pines HOA," he said, pulling a clipboard from the cab. "We are supposed to finish grading this road today." "I do not care what your work order says. I'm the property owner. I did not authorize this, and you need to leave now or I'm calling the sheriff." The man looked uncertain. "Look, buddy, I'm just doing my job. Take it up with whoever hired us." "I'm taking it up with you. You are on my land without permission. Leave now." A white Lexus SUV came bouncing down the rough road, pulling up beside us. Brenda Morrison stepped out, dressed in expensive athleisure wear and designer sunglasses despite the overcast morning. "Mr. Caldwell, you are interfering with authorized HOA business," she announced. "There is nothing authorized about this, Mrs. Morrison. This is my property. You had no right to cut this road, and your contractors need to leave immediately. I already explained the covenant provisions to you, and my attorney already confirmed that I opted out of any such provisions. You are trespassing, and you are directing others to trespass. That is a crime." Brenda's face flushed red. She was probably in her mid-50s, with the kind of angular haircut that seemed mandatory for HOA board presidents everywhere. "I will not be spoken to this way. The HOA board has the authority to make decisions for the good of the community, and if you cannot be a team player, then perhaps you should consider selling your property and moving somewhere more suited to your antisocial tendencies." Richard, who had been standing quietly to the side, spoke up. "Madam, I am a licensed forester, and I have just completed an assessment showing approximately $60,000 in timber damage from your road. Mr. Caldwell has every right to refuse access and to seek legal compensation." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "It is a fact," I said. "You have destroyed valuable timber on my land without authorization. I have filed a police report, and my attorney is preparing a lawsuit. If your contractors do not leave right now, I will have you all arrested for criminal trespassing." The bulldozer operator was already climbing back into his cab. "Madam, I am not getting in the middle of a property dispute. If he says it is his land and he does not want us here, we are leaving." "You are under contract with the HOA," Brenda protested, "and I am not going to jail for you. Come on, boys, pack it up." The construction crew left, leaving Brenda standing beside her Lexus, practically vibrating with rage. "You have not heard the last of this, Mr. Caldwell. The HOA has legal resources, and we will enforce our rights." "You do not have any rights to my timberland," I said, "and if you or anyone else sets foot on this property again without my permission, I will have you arrested. Now, get off my land." She left in a spray of gravel and displaced soil, her Lexus bouncing over the rough road back toward the development. Richard let out a low whistle. "You've really pissed her off." "She pissed me off first. $60,000 worth." Over the next week, things escalated. Marcus sent the cease and desist letter, which the HOA apparently ignored. Instead, they sent me a letter threatening to fine me $15,000 for interfering with approved community improvements and demanding I allow them to complete the road within 30 days or face legal action. I responded by filing a formal lawsuit in Taney County Circuit Court seeking damages for the destroyed timber, legal fees, and a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from accessing my land. The local newspaper got wind of the dispute and ran a story that painted the HOA in a decidedly negative light, especially after I showed the reporter the documentation proving I had opted out of the covenant provisions they claimed gave them authority. Then things got weird. I woke up one morning to find that someone had dumped a load of construction debris at the entrance to my driveway. Broken concrete, twisted rebar, and what looked like remnants of old roofing materials blocked my access to the main road. I called the sheriff's office again, and this time they took it more seriously. Deputy Richardson came out with his supervisor, Sergeant Matthews, who had seen enough HOA disputes to recognize the pattern. "This is harassment," Matthews said bluntly. "Do you have security cameras?" "Not yet, but I am installing them today." "Good. Document everything, every interaction, every incident, every communication. People like this tend to escalate, and you want a clear record when they finally cross the line that gets them arrested. I spent $500 on a comprehensive security camera system that covered my driveway, the main house, and critical points along the unauthorized road. The installation guy, a talkative local named Jerry, mentioned that he had installed cameras for 3 other people in disputes with Whispering Pines, HOA, in the past year alone. "That Brenda Morrison is something else," he said while mounting a camera to my garage. "She tried to fine my cousin $2,000 because his vegetable garden was visible from the street. Said it violated aesthetic standards. He ended up having to hire a lawyer just to tell her the tomato plants are not illegal." "Sounds about right," I muttered. The cameras proved their worth within 48 hours. At 2 in the morning, a pickup truck without license plates pulled onto my property and dumped another load of debris, this time across the unauthorized road itself. The cameras got clear footage of the truck and a partial view of the driver, who was definitely male, but too far away for facial identification. I sent the footage to Sergeant Matthews, who promised to investigate. Then I made a decision that I had been mulling over for several days. If the HOA wanted to play games with my property, I was going to play a different game entirely. I called Richard back and asked him to identify which trees along the road were already so damaged that they would not recover. He came out that afternoon and marked 17 trees with orange tape. These were oaks and hickories that the road construction had critically damaged, trees that would likely die within the next year or two regardless of what I did. "You're thinking about dropping them, or not you?" Richard asked. "I am thinking about managing my timber in a way that protects my property rights," I said carefully. "If these trees are going to die anyway, I might as well salvage what I can. And if they happen to fall in a way that blocks the unauthorized road, that would be completely coincidental." Richard grinned. "You know what? I did not see anything. But hypothetically, if someone were to fall these trees, they would want to make sure it was done safely and legally. A licensed timber operator, proper safety equipment, advance notification to the county in case of road access issues." "Hypothetically, of course." "Of course. I hired a local timber company, Ozark Timber Services, run by a no-nonsense guy named Dale who had been cutting trees in Taney County for 30 years. I explained the situation, showed him the marked trees, and told him exactly where I wanted them to fall. "You want me to drop them across this road," he said. It was not a question. "I want you to fall them safely in whatever direction makes the most sense for the trees and the terrain," I said. "If that happens to be across the unauthorized road that was cut through my property without permission, then that is where they fall." Dale looked at the trees, looked at the road, and looked back at me. "Your property, your trees, your decision. But you know this is going to make some people very angry." "They made me angry first. And unlike them, I'm not breaking any laws. I'm harvesting damaged trees on my own property. Fair enough. We can start tomorrow if you want. This will take us about 3 days to fall them all safely. I filed the required notification with the county about commercial timber operations on my property, a completely legal and routine process. Then, I sent a courtesy email to the HOA board, informing them that I would be conducting timber harvesting operations over the next week and that any unauthorized persons on my property would be subject to arrest for trespassing. Brenda called within an hour, absolutely livid. "You cannot cut down those trees," she shrieked. "That road is essential infrastructure for the community." "That road is an illegal trespass across my property," I replied calmly, "and I can harvest any trees I want on my own land. I am following all county regulations and safety protocols." "This is deliberate sabotage." "This is property management. If you had concerns about tree harvesting on the route of your unauthorized road, perhaps you should have asked permission before cutting it in the first place. I am warning you, Mr. Caldwell. If you block that road, the HOA will take legal action." "I look forward to seeing you in court, Mrs. Morrison. We already have a date scheduled for the hearing on my lawsuit against the HOA. Feel free to bring up your concerns about my timber management at that time." She hung up on me again. It was becoming a pattern. Dale and his crew showed up at dawn the next morning with chainsaws, safety equipment, and a small crane for managing the fall direction. I watched from a safe distance as they assessed each tree, planned the cuts, and methodically began the work. The first oak came down with a tremendous crash, falling perfectly across the unauthorized road. The second followed an hour later. By the end of the first day, they had felled 6 trees, creating an impassable barrier of timber across both ends of the road where it entered and exited my property. The security cameras captured Brenda's white Lexus arriving at the southern entrance to the road that evening. She got out, stared at the massive oak trunk blocking the route, and I could see her mouth moving in what I assumed were profanities. She tried calling me, but I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a nearly incoherent rant about lawsuits, property values, and community standards. Day 2 brought more of the same. Dale's crew worked efficiently, and the pile of fallen timber grew more impressive. The trees were valuable hardwood, and Dale arranged for a lumber mill to come by the following week to process them. Even damaged, the salvage value would offset some of my losses. On day 3, things came to a head. I was standing near the northern barricade of fallen trees when 3 vehicles pulled up on the HOA side of the barrier. Brenda emerged from the Lexus, followed by 2 men I did not recognize getting out of the other cars. One was carrying what looked like a chainsaw. I pulled out my phone and started recording as I walked toward them, staying on my side of the fallen timber. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," I called out. "Can I help you?" "You can move these trees immediately," she demanded. "The HOA has business on the other side, and you are deliberately obstructing access." "These are trees that I legally harvested on my own property. They are lying where they fell during legitimate timber operations. You deliberately dropped them to block the road. I harvested damaged trees that were going to die anyway because of the road you illegally cut through my property. Where they fell is irrelevant." One of the men with Brenda started pulling the chainsaw out of his truck. "Madam, you want me to cut through?" "Put that away," I said sharply. "This is private property. You are trespassing, and if you damage my timber, I will have you arrested and sue you personally for the value." The man hesitated, looking at Brenda. "Do it," she ordered. "Cut us a path through." "Mrs. Morrison, I am recording this. You are directing someone to commit criminal trespassing and property destruction. Do not do this. That road is HOA property under the covenant provisions. No court has ruled that, and my attorney has documentation proving I opted out of those provisions. This is my land, those are my trees, and if any of you cross this property line or damage my timber, I am calling the sheriff and pressing charges." The man with the chainsaw looked uncomfortable. "Madam, if he is saying this is his property, I am the HOA president. I am authorizing this. You do not have authority on my land." I was done being patient. I pulled up the sheriff's office number on my phone. "Last chance. Leave now or I'm making the call." The second man, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Brenda, this is crazy. If he is right about the property lines, we could all be arrested. I'm not risking that. Fine, Brenda spat. But this is not over, Mr. Caldwell. The HOA will see you ruined for this obstruction. Looking forward to court, I replied. They left, and I immediately called Sergeant Matthews anyway to report the attempted trespassing and property destruction. He took my statement and asked me to email him the video I had just recorded. Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to be straight with you, he said. This HOA is heading for serious legal trouble. We have had multiple complaints about their activities, and the county prosecutor is starting to pay attention. Keep documenting everything, and do not take matters into your own hands beyond protecting your property rights. I understand, Sergeant. The next week brought my favorite development yet. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story with the headline, HOA dispute escalates as property owner blocks unauthorized road. The article included quotes from my attorney about the illegal road construction, estimates of the timber damage, and details about my documentation, proving I had opted out of the covenant provisions the HOA claimed gave them authority. The comments section on the newspaper's website was overwhelmingly in my favor. Apparently, Whispering Pines HOA had made enemies throughout the community with their heavy-handed tactics, and people were delighted to see someone fighting back effectively. But Brenda was not done, not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, I received notice that the HOA was filing a countersuit against me for malicious obstruction of community infrastructure and seeking $200,000 in damages. The lawsuit was legally frivolous, but it would still cost money and time to defend. Marcus was unfazed. This is a classic slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. They are trying to bully you into backing down by burying you in legal costs. Missouri has anti-slap statutes, and we can probably get this dismissed quickly while recovering your attorney fees. The court hearing for my original lawsuit against the HOA was scheduled for mid-November. In the meantime, I focused on fortifying my position. I had the entire property surveyed again by a licensed surveyor who confirmed that the road was entirely on my land and that none of my timber acreage fell within HOA jurisdiction. I compiled every piece of documentation showing that I had opted out of the 2019 covenant amendments. I organized all of Richard's timber damage assessments, Dale's harvesting records, and every photograph and video I had taken. I also installed a heavy-duty locked gate at both ends of my driveway and added more security cameras. The harassment had continued sporadically with several more incidents of dumped debris and one night where someone spray-painted "selfish" across my mailbox. The cameras never caught clear enough images for identification, but Sergeant Matthews assured me they were building a case. October brought an unexpected development. I received a certified letter from the HOA's law firm. Not about the lawsuits, but about something entirely different. Apparently, the firm had conducted an audit of Brenda Morrison's activities as HOA president and discovered irregularities in financial management and unauthorized expenditures. The letter informed me that Brenda had been removed as HOA president pending an investigation, and that the new acting president, a man named Gerald Thompson, wished to discuss a settlement of our disputes. I met Gerald at a coffee shop in Branson the following week. He was in his 60s, retired from a career in banking, and seemed genuinely mortified by what had happened. "Mr. Caldwell, I want to start by apologizing," he said as soon as we sat down. "The previous board, under Mrs. Morrison's leadership, acted without proper authorization and without conducting due diligence on property rights. The law firm has confirmed that you did indeed opt out of the covenant provisions, and the road construction was completely unauthorized." "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "but I have incurred significant damages." "We understand. The HOA is prepared to offer compensation for the timber damage. Our assessor came up with a figure of $55,000, which is in line with your forester's estimate. We would also pay your legal fees to date and agree to a permanent easement restriction, acknowledging that your timber acreage is not subject to HOA authority." "What about the road?" "We would remove it entirely, restore the land as best we can, and pay for any necessary environmental remediation. The new construction we were trying to access has been canceled. It turns out that project was also improperly authorized." I leaned back in my chair, processing this. What happened with Brenda Morrison? Gerald's expression darkened. That is where things get complicated. The audit revealed that she had been using HOA funds for personal expenses, spa treatments, shopping trips, even a vacation to Hawaii that she claimed was for an HOA conference that never existed. We are talking about approximately $80,000 in misappropriated funds over 3 years. That is embezzlement. Yes. The board voted to refer the matter to the Taney County Prosecutor's Office. Mrs. Morrison has been criminally charged. I felt a grim satisfaction. So she is facing actual consequences. Multiple felony counts. Her attorney is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but it is not looking good for her. The prosecutor is taking white-collar crime seriously, especially when it involves abuse of a position of trust. We spent another hour working through details. Gerald was straightforward and reasonable, everything Brenda had not been. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a settlement agreement that my attorney would formalize. The HOA would pay $75,000 total, covering timber damages, legal fees, and compensation for my time in aggravation. They would remove the road at their expense, restoring the land with native plantings. They would formally acknowledge my property rights in recorded documents that would run with the land in perpetuity. And they would pay for an independent environmental assessment to ensure no lasting damage from the road construction. In return, I would drop my lawsuit and agree not to pursue additional damages. It was a fair deal, better than I might have gotten even if I won in court. Marcus reviewed the settlement proposal and gave his approval. This is a good outcome, Connor. You're getting appropriate compensation, establishing clear boundaries, and avoiding years of litigation. I recommend accepting. I signed the agreement in early November. The HOA began removing the road the following week, using a restoration company that specialized in environmental remediation. They carefully extracted the gravel, broke up the compacted soil, and replanted the entire route with native saplings and ground cover. It would take years for the land to fully recover, but at least it was being done properly. The fallen trees across the road entrances stayed where they were until the mill crew came to process them. I ended up salvaging about $20,000 worth of quality hardwood, which helped offset my overall losses. Brenda Morrison's criminal case proceeded through the system with methodical precision. The prosecutor charged her with first-degree stealing and abuse of fiduciary duty. Her attorney tried to argue that the expenses were legitimate business costs, but the Hawaii vacation photos she had posted on Facebook rather undermined that defense. In February, she pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of third-degree stealing and was sentenced to 3 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though given that she had already spent the money, recovery seemed unlikely. The local newspaper covered the sentencing, and I felt no sympathy reading about it. She had lied, bullied, and stolen her way through years of HOA leadership, and it had finally caught up with her. The civil lawsuit between us was dismissed as part of the settlement agreement. The HOA's countersuit against me was withdrawn with prejudice, meaning they could never refile it. My property rights were firmly established and recorded with the county. By spring, the restored area where the road had been was showing signs of recovery. The native plantings were taking root, and the disturbed soil was beginning to stabilize. It would never be exactly as it was before the road was cut, but it was healing. I stood looking at the restoration work one warm April morning, watching a pair of cardinals building a nest in one of the new saplings. My property was mine again, clearly and unambiguously. The boundaries were established, the threats had ended, and I could go back to managing my timber in peace. Gerald Thompson had turned out to be a competent HOA president, implementing reforms that prevented future abuses. He had established clear protocols for any project affecting property beyond the core development, requiring legal review and documented consent from affected owners. The HOA board now had regular financial audits and spending oversight. It was, by all accounts, functioning the way an HOA was supposed to function. I ran into Gerald at the hardware store in May, and we chatted briefly about the continued recovery of the land. "You know," he said, "what happened with you ended up being the catalyst for real change in the HOA. People were afraid to speak up against Brenda, but after everything came out, Residents started demanding accountability. We have had 3 board members resign because they could not handle the new transparency requirements. Transparency seems like a low bar for management, I observed. You would think so, but you would be surprised how many people get involved in HOAs specifically because they want unchecked authority over their neighbors. We are working on changing that culture. Good luck with that. Thanks, and thank you for holding your ground, even though I know it cost you time and money. If you had just rolled over, Brenda would still be running roughshod over everyone. I appreciated the acknowledgement, even if it had been an expensive and stressful fight. The settlement money had covered my actual losses, but the months of dealing with harassment and legal threats had taken a toll. Still, I had established something important. My property was mine, and no amount of HOA bluster could change that. The timber acreage continued to thrive under my management. I implemented the selective harvesting plan Richard and I had developed, taking out mature trees in a sustainable rotation that maintained the health of the forest while generating modest income. The damaged trees from the road incident had been replaced with new plantings, and in 20 years, no one would be able to tell there had ever been a disruption. I kept the security cameras running, more out of habit than necessity. The harassment had stopped completely once Brenda was removed from power. The new HOA board sent occasional newsletters about community events, but made no demands on my property or time. It was peaceful, finally. On a warm evening in June, I sat on my back porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sun set over my timber stand. The trees were in full leaf, a carpet of green stretching across the acres I had worked so hard to protect. Somewhere in the woods, an owl hooted, beginning its nightly hunt. My phone buzzed with an email from Marcus. The final restitution check from the HOA had cleared, representing the last payment in our settlement agreement. Everything was officially concluded. I thought about the past year, about the morning I had first discovered the unauthorized road and how angry I had been. That anger had been justified, but I had channeled it into methodical action rather than emotional reaction. Documentation, legal process, strategic property management, all of it had worked together to protect my rights and hold the HOA accountable. The fallen trees blocking both ends of the road had been the turning point. It was a dramatic move, certainly, but it was also perfectly legal. I had harvested damaged timber on my own property using licensed operators and proper safety protocols. That the trees happened to fall across an unauthorized road was simply a consequence of the road's illegal placement. And when Brenda had panicked, when she had directed someone to cut through my timber despite my warnings, she had provided me with clear evidence of her willingness to violate the law. That video had been valuable in settlement negotiations, showing that the HOA leadership was not just mistaken about their authority, but actively malicious in asserting it. The whole situation had vindicated my approach to property ownership. I had bought this land specifically to have control over my own space, to make decisions about timber management and land use without interference. The HOA had tested that control, and I had defended it successfully. I finished my whiskey and went inside, feeling satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with money or legal victories. My land was mine, the trees were mine, the decisions were mine, and no HOA president with an inflated sense of authority would ever change that. The following months were blessedly uneventful. I focused on the things I had bought the property for in the first place, managing the timber, maintaining the trails I had cut through the woods, and enjoying the peace of rural Missouri. The HOA stayed in its lane, and I stayed in mine. In August, I got a call from Deputy Richardson, who I had not heard from since the criminal investigation into the debris dumping the previous year. "Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to give you a courtesy update," he said. "We finally identified the person who was dumping debris on your property last fall. It was Brenda Morrison's nephew, a guy named Kevin Morrison. He confessed as part of a plea deal on an unrelated vandalism charge. Is he being charged for what he did to my property? Probably not worth pursuing at this point since the main perpetrator, his aunt, is already in prison. But I wanted you to know we closed the case. Your security camera footage was instrumental in building the overall pattern of harassment. I appreciate you letting me know." "No problem. And between you and me, I'm glad you stood your ground with that HOA." And we see too many cases where people get bullied into submission because they do not know their rights or cannot afford to fight. It is good when someone fights back and wins. After we hung up, I thought about all the people who had been caught up in Brenda's schemes. The HOA members who had paid dues that she embezzled, the residents she had fined over petty violations, the contractors she had directed to work on my property without authorization, putting them at legal risk. The scope of the damage she had caused went far beyond just my timber. But she was facing consequences now, real ones: prison time, criminal record, restitution obligations, and the HOA had reformed under new leadership, implementing checks and balances that should prevent future abuses. I allowed myself to feel good about that outcome. September brought the first hints of fall, and I walked my property line with Richard, discussing the next phase of my management plan. The restored area where the road had been was filling in nicely, though it would be years before the new trees reached maturity. "You know, Connor," Richard said as we examined a particularly nice hickory, "this whole incident, as ugly as it was, probably increased the overall value of your property." "How do you figure that?" "You've got recorded documentation now that permanently exempts your timber acreage from HOA control. That is a selling point if you ever decide to sell. Buyers will pay a premium for land with clear title and no association entanglements." "I am not planning to sell." "I know, but still. You fought for something that has lasting value, literally and legally." He was right. The settlement agreement and recorded easement restrictions were now part of the permanent property record. Any future owner would have the same protections I had fought for. As fall progressed and the leaves began to turn, I reflected on the changes of the past year. The property looked different in subtle ways. The restored road area created a slight variation in the tree cover, a younger generation of growth among the older stands. But the overall forest was healthy, thriving, and unequivocally mine. The HOA held its annual meeting in October, and out of curiosity, I attended. Gerald Thompson ran an efficient meeting, presenting financial reports with full transparency and soliciting input from residents on proposed projects. It was boring in the best possible way, a functional community organization rather than a personal fiefdom. During the open comment period, a woman I did not know stood up and thanked the board for the reforms they had implemented. "For years, I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home," she said. "Every little thing was a potential violation, a potential fine, a potential confrontation. It is such a relief to have a board that treats us like adults and partners rather than subjects." Several other residents echoed similar sentiments. The culture change was real and appreciated. After the meeting, Gerald pulled me aside. "I am glad you came. I think it is important for people to see that we have moved past the conflicts of last year." "You have done good work here," I acknowledged. "Not easy, cleaning up someone else's mess." "No, but necessary. And honestly, your lawsuit was the wake-up call the community needed. A lot of residents did not realize how far out of bounds the previous board had gone until everything came to light." Winter came gently to the Ozarks that year, with snow dusting the timber and ice forming delicate patterns on the bare branches. I spent quiet days maintaining equipment, reviewing my timber records, and planning for the spring planting season. The $75,000 settlement had been wisely invested, creating a buffer for my retirement plans and ensuring I had resources for ongoing land management. The salvaged timber money had gone into a separate fund for replanting and restoration work. Financially, legally, and practically, I'd come through the conflict in a strong position. But more than that, I had established something important about boundaries and respect. The HOA had learned that they could not simply ignore property rights when it was convenient. The community had learned that accountability mattered, and I had learned that sometimes the fight is worth it. As January arrived and I marked a full year since the settlement agreement, I received one final piece of correspondence related to the whole mess. It was a letter from Brenda Morrison, forwarded through my attorney. The letter was brief, and I suspected, written at the direction of her attorney or prison counselor. She apologized for her actions, acknowledged that she had violated my property rights, and expressed regret for the damage caused. It was carefully worded to avoid any admissions that might affect her criminal case or restitution obligations, but it seemed sincere enough. I read it once, filed it with the rest of the documentation from the case, and moved on. I did not need her apology, but I supposed it was a final punctuation mark on the whole affair. Spring returned, as it always does, and I stood once again at the edge of my timber stand, watching new growth emerge from the forest floor. The property was exactly what I had wanted it to be, a place of peace and productivity under my control and management. The unauthorized road was gone, erased as thoroughly as the HOA's ability to trespass on my land. The trees I had felled across both ends had served their purpose, making a statement about property rights and consequences that even Brenda Morrison had finally understood. I thought about that morning when I had first seen the tire tracks through my timber, the surge of anger and violation I had felt. That anger had been transformed into action, documentation, legal process, and ultimately, vindication. The system had worked, eventually, because I had made it work through persistence and proper channels. Other property owners had contacted me over the months, people dealing with their own HOA disputes and other developments. I had shared what I learned about documentation, knowing your rights, and standing firm when you are in the right. Several had successfully pushed back against their own abusive boards, using strategies similar to what I had employed. Perhaps that was the real legacy of the whole mess. Not just my own property rights protected, but a template for others facing similar challenges. Know your rights, document everything, use proper legal channels, and do not back down when you are right. As I walked back to the house that spring morning, I passed the spot where the road had cut through, now healing with new growth and native plantings. In a few more years, it would be difficult to tell anything had ever happened there. The forest was resilient, given time and proper care. So was I, apparently. The stress of the conflict had been real, but so was the satisfaction of winning, of protecting something important, of holding people accountable for their actions. My phone rang as I reached the porch. It was Dale from Ozark Timber Services. "Connor, I've got another job near your property, and I wanted to give you a heads up about equipment traffic in the area. Also wanted to thank you again for the referral." "Referral?" "Yeah, the guy from 2 parcels over said you told him I did good work when you needed those damaged trees removed. Just finished his site assessment." I smiled. "My neighbor must have had storm damage over the winter." "You did do good work. Glad I could pass your name along." "Appreciate it. Those trees you had me drop, that was some precision work. Do not often get asked to block a road with fallen timber, but it sure was satisfying when they came down exactly where you wanted them." It was satisfying, I agreed. After we hung up, I thought about those fallen trees one more time. They had been more than just timber, more than just obstacles. They had been a statement, a boundary, a line in the dirt that said this far and no further. And when Brenda Morrison had panicked, when she had tried to force her way through despite the clear legal and property rights issues, she had sealed her own fate. The video of her directing someone to cut through my timber had been damning evidence of her mindset and methods, contributing to the broader pattern that had ultimately led to criminal charges. I had not set out to destroy anyone or ruin any lives. I had simply defended my property and my rights using legal and appropriate means. That Brenda's actions had caught up with her was a consequence of her own choices, not my vindictiveness. The afternoon sun was warm on my face as I sat on the porch, looking out over land that was undeniably, legally, and permanently mine. The HOA had learned its lesson. Brenda Morrison was serving her sentence, Gerald Thompson was running a reformed and accountable organization, and my timber stood tall and healthy, managed according to my plan and my timeline. It had been a hell of a fight, but it had been worth it. Every documented photograph, every legal filing, every firm boundary I had set had contributed to an outcome that protected not just my property, but the principle that property rights matter, that legal process works, and that bullies do not win when good people stand their ground. The trees I had felled across both ends of that unauthorized road were long since processed into lumber, but their impact remained. They had blocked more than just physical access. They had blocked an illegal power grab, an abuse of authority, and a pattern of behavior that had harmed an entire community. And in the end, justice had been served, my property had been protected, and life had returned to the peaceful management of timber and land that I had wanted all along. I raised my glass of iced tea in a silent toast to those fallen trees, to the property lines that held firm, and to the simple but powerful truth that when you are right and you stand your ground, the law will eventually back you up. The fight was over. The land was healing. And I was home, on my property, under my trees, exactly where I belonged.